Not afraid to tell it like it is. The Scott Thompson Show, weekdays from noon till 3 on AM 900 CHML.
I'm sure you've seen the video. If you haven't seen it by now, you can go to 900CHML.com and, of course, find it on the Scott Thompson Show page and blog, among many other places. A Hydro One employee will be fired after he was identified as one of the men who City News reporter Shauna Hunt confronted about the vulgar FHRITP trend during Sunday's Toronto FC game. Hydro One issued a statement late Tuesday saying it was terminating the employee in connection with the incidents, which was captured on video. It violates their code of conduct. To talk more about all of this and what rights are violated and what aren't, Stuart Rudner is with us, employment lawyer at Rudner McDonald LLP, and with us now. Good afternoon, Stuart. How are you today?
I'm great, Scott. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you for taking the time. We appreciate this. I'm sure you've seen the video. I'm sure you know the case. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've seen the video. Well, my first thought is I'm amazed at how quickly things happen these days. Because the video I saw it, I think, 2 days ago, and he's already been fired, and we're already doing the postmortem of whether he should have been fired or not.
It is amazing how quick it happens. The other thing that I'm amazed at is no matter how many times this happens, there's always someone else ready to do it again.
Well, one thing I've been saying for about a decade now is technology is wonderful, but it also gives employees new and more interesting ways to get into trouble.
Yeah, very true, very true. And clearly the laws are having a hard time keeping up with the technology.
Well, you know, it's interesting because the law has never changed in the sense that, you know, by default, what you do on your own time is your own business. But the law has always said that if it impacts your employer or your employment relationship, it can lead to discipline or dismissal. It's just that in the past, those cases were few and far between. Now we're seeing them every week.
All right, so let's get to it, Stuart. You've seen everything here. Does this man have a case to go to court and say, hey, I shouldn't have been fired? Or does Hydro One say it's cut and dry?
Well, I'm going to give you the very typical lawyer's answer here and say it depends, Scott. There's just too many unknowns. I mean, basically in Canada, you can be fired in two ways, either with cause or without cause. If you have just cause to fire somebody, then they are entitled to nothing. No notice, no severance, no termination pay. If you don't have just cause, then you can always let somebody go unless they're unionized or it's a human rights issue, but you got to pay them out. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, I've written a book. It's called You're Fired. It's all about when companies have cause to fire someone or when they do or they don't. But it's an incredibly complicated area. And the point that a lot of people don't appreciate is you can't just look at the misconduct in isolation. You know, let's assume, I mean, here there's no question about what this guy did. They don't have to prove it because it's on video. But even once you assume that he engaged in misconduct, courts have said that you have to look at all the circumstances. How long has he been employed? Has he been in trouble before? What kind of job does he have? How did he respond when he's confronted? Are there mitigating factors? You've got to look at all these factors and then assess whether it has irreparably broken the employment relationship or not.
So obviously his attitude post-event determines a lot of where this goes from here.
Well, that's a great point. That's a lot of what I'm seeing in the last few years is courts are looking at how somebody responds when they're confronted. And you could have two individuals who do the exact same thing. Let's say you got two people who are caught taking product out of the warehouse. But one of them is a long-serving employee with a clean record who owns up to it before he's even caught and apologizes. And the other one is a short-service employee. He's been in trouble a few times, not only lies about it, but takes steps to cover up his misconduct. It's quite likely a court would say the first person should get another chance, but you can fire the second one.
Right. Getting back to their code of conduct, is it clear that he violated that?
I have to confess, I haven't read the code of conduct, but from the excerpts I've seen and the references I've seen, it sounds as though he does. Now, typically, code of conduct would refer to workplace conduct, and workplace conduct extends outside the four walls of your workplace, but it would typically involve behavior amongst colleagues. So it could be a text message sent from one colleague to another, even if it's not at work. This is clearly beyond the workplace completely, but it may well be a breach of the conduct, or sorry, of the policy if it addresses things like harassment and sexual harassment.
What about making the brand look bad?
That's where we often see these cases. You know, most people are not dumb enough to go online or on video and say, my company's awful or they make bad products.
Right.
But just by going online and doing something offensive or inappropriate, if the person can be tied back to the company, it impacts their reputation. And even to me, the best example of that in this case is that many people are referring to this on Twitter as the Hydro One incident.
Yeah. Wow. So in a sense, the repercussions in social media you could use in court afterwards, saying, "Well, look, here's clearly the impact that it has on the brand."
Absolutely, and that's, as I said, what you do on your own time is generally your own business. But if it impacts the employer or the relationship, which includes the employer's reputation, that can be cause for discipline and, in the right case, dismissal.
What about the fact that obviously people are upset with citizens are upset with government spending, this sort of thing, sunshine lists, and then it also appears that this guy was on the sunshine list. What factor does that play in all of this, or does it?
Legally,
other than it makes it sting even more for him, I guess.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, legally, I think it has no bearing whatsoever, but it probably makes it sting more for him, and it probably gives a lot of people some satisfaction.
Well, yeah, but on the other hand, I could see people going, "What the heck is going on at Hydro One? Is this we're hearing every year that there's more and more people on the sunshine list, and is this the type of goof that they put on the sunshine list? Where's the quality control?"
Yeah, and the only relevance it might have, I mean, I mentioned one of the factors is the nature of the job the person has. So if they're in a relatively senior position where you need to have more trust and confidence in their conduct, then it will become more relevant.
So if you were this young man right now, what advice would you be giving him?
Well, I mean, simple advice, although it sounds self-serving, is to go see an employment lawyer.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, just because you engage in misconduct doesn't necessarily give the company the right to fire you. So he may well be entitled to some sort of severance package.
That being said, obviously they want him out. Would he be out and then just with severance? Or could they have to reinstate him?
The only time that reinstatement comes into play is either if it's a unionized context, and I'm not sure if he's covered by collective agreement, or if it's a human rights claim. Otherwise, you never get your job back. You only get compensation.
All right. We've had lots of people email in on this and say he was on his own time. He's not representing the company. He's not in uniform. Therefore, he's not at fault.
Yeah, and that's where you get back to. Generally, on your own time is off limits. But if it impacts the company or their reputation, and this is the fascinating thing about social media now. 30 years ago, he may have done the same thing, and he would have been some goof on TV saying silly things. Now it doesn't take long for people to put together that he works for Hydro One, and now it impacts Hydro One's reputation.
Are you surprised by, are these sorts of cases, are you seeing a lot of them, or are they on the increase?
Absolutely. It started off with a trickle, but in the last year, we're seeing things like this almost every week. I mean, it was not that long ago that, and I forget her name now, but the lady was supposed to have a concert for the TSO, posted some comments about the Ukraine-Russia dispute. Concert was canceled. There was an Ontario Hockey League referee who posted some disparaging comments about women in Sault Ste. Marie. Nothing to do with his job, did it on his own time, but he was suspended for the rest of the season. We also had some OHL players a few months ago who made some comments about women, and they were suspended. We're seeing more and more of this almost every week, and people just don't seem to have gotten it through their heads that there can be workplace consequences for what you do on your own time.
Some may look at this, especially the FC incident, and say, "Oh, this is just political correctness gone mad. It's just guys out there having a couple of beers and blah, 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 blah." Explain it to them why it's not just that.
Well, I guess from a social perspective, clearly this whole trend of, whatever the word is, embarrassing, TV reporters, is just offensive and completely inappropriate. And I don't think that's political correctness. I think that's just the reality. My kids would certainly know better than that, and any adult making over $100,000 should know better than that. So that's the social side. And from the legal side, again, I'll keep coming back to if it impacts the employer or the workplace. So if this was just some guy who worked for himself or we never found out who he worked for, it wouldn't have any implications on his job. But because people found out very quickly that he's a Hydro One guy, this now became a Hydro One issue, and it impacted their reputation, and they're entitled to take some action. Whether they can fire him or not, we don't know, but they're entitled to take some action because of that.
So this isn't a clear-cut case by any means?
Absolutely not. To put it simply, just cause for dismissal is never clear-cut.
Surprised, getting back to your other point, surprised that people are still not getting the message. Like you were talking about the increase in these cases. This is obviously an extremely popular one. It will get a lot of coverage. Will this continue, or will people finally figure it out?
I wish I had the answer to that. I'd also have the winning lottery number ticket, I suppose. I'm really hoping that people are going to start to understand that as we see more and more examples of this and more examples where people lose their jobs. I'm hoping that it'll start to sink in, but it's certainly taken a long time. I mean, the other example, and this was an American one, of course we see more in the States because of the larger population, but there was a guy, I mean really a kid, who worked at Taco Bell in the States and posted a selfie of himself, obviously, licking a stack of taco shells.
Yeah, I remember that.
So again, well, that was on work time, but even if it wasn't, it obviously has an impact on the workplace. So people have got to understand, we have freedom of speech, and I've often had people say to me when I do a presentation, and I say, be careful about what you do even on your own time. I've had people respond, well, we live in Canada, we have freedom of speech, et cetera, et cetera. Freedom of speech protects you from imprisonment in most cases for what you say. But it doesn't mean there are no consequences whatsoever, and it certainly doesn't mean there's no workplace consequences.
Over time, do you see cameras keeping us honest, technology keeping us honest? I mean, we're seeing it with police forces in the United States.
Yes, you know what, that's a great point. Look, I don't know if we're in the nanny state or not. Lots of people would say we are, but more and more of what we do is being tracked, whether it's video or whether it's somehow tracking online. It's harder and harder to be anonymous. So, hopefully people understand that as well.
Are cameras creating a nanny state, do you think? Or are they just keeping us honest? And the reason that you're getting so many of these cases is because what this is exposing is that maybe we're not that honest or not that good.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the challenges. A lot of times employers learn of these things because of surveillance efforts. So you have a preliminary issue about whether they can even rely upon that evidence. There are employers, and here we heard about the principal for the Toronto District School Board who found a camera in his office. So a lot of employers are starting to or want to put cameras in the workplace, but generally speaking, privacy laws will say you can't do that unless there's a very compelling reason.
What about the police laying charges?
Well, look, I'll have to defer the question. I'm not a criminal lawyer, so
right.
I don't know what the charges would be or whether there'd be merit to it. So, yeah, I'd rather not comment on that.
Okay, what about keeping them out of Maple Leaf sports and entertainment venues? I guess they have the right to do that.
Yeah, it's a private venue, so they do have the right to keep people out based upon who they choose. I mean, I guess it's no different, but it's somewhat different than Tampa Bay Lightning saying that we're not going to sell tickets to people from outside of the state of Florida.
Yeah. Are you surprised that obviously this spread like wildfire through social media and such and got to the rest of us very quickly? Are you surprised that the police, his employer, and the venue reacted so quickly?
I am somewhat surprised, Scott. I mean, it just amazes me how quickly this happened. And, one of the things that our firm often tells our employer clients is never react in haste.
Yeah.
Which has been the traditional advice that if you think somebody engaged in misconduct, like I said before, you've got to do an investigation, you've got to confront them, you've got to consider if there's mitigating factors, then you make your decision as to whether you're going to impose discipline or dismissal or nothing at all. And you used to have, you could never drag your heels, but you used to have some time to do that. I guess what drove this was not so much the legal issue as the PR issues. Hydro One clearly wanted to get ahead of the ball and make a statement that we don't condone this type of thing and we're going to react swiftly to deal with it.
I'm quite surprised at that. Stuart Rudner's been with his employment lawyer with Rudner McDonald LLP, talking about the Hydro One employee who is going to be fired, or if he isn't already. And that's the other thing, too. It's like, you haven't been fired yet. In other words, they haven't even told the guy, but they're already announcing that they have.
Yeah.
Does that have any bearing? Can you do that? Can you tell people you're going to fire somebody before you actually do?
I would definitely not recommend that. I mean, there's a principle in law that employers have a duty to act in good faith in the course of dismissing someone, which means being honest, which means not firing them for disingenuous reasons, which means not taking steps that would embarrass or humiliate them. To me, when you announce to the world that you're going to fire somebody, and I'm not clear on all facts, but if it's the case that they told everyone that they were going to fire him before they told him, to me that's certainly a pretty good argument to say there was some bad faith there, that he was not treated properly.
That may help with a severance then.
It may well, and that can tell you to what my law partner wrote a book on extraordinary damages in employment law, and so she's written a lot about punitive damages, bad faith damages, and all the additional damages someone can seek over and above wrongful dismissal.
Website we can go to, Stuart, to find out what you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, you can go to RudnerMcDonald.com. You can also check out Canadian HR Law on Twitter or on LinkedIn.
All right. Stuart Rudner's been with us, employment lawyer with Rudner McDonald LLP on the Hydro One scenario, and Shauna Hunt. Stuart, thanks for the time and insight. Much appreciated.
Thanks so much, Scott. I enjoyed it.